The high school I was in for my junior year was my second of 3 high schools I was in over 4 years. I switched schools twice due to several factors, the biggest of which being in constant fights, because I would have extensive depressive episodes and I had a drug issue. I had been expelled from my first high school at the end of my second year due to a pretty bad fight. I spent the summer doing drugs and spending days or even weeks away from home. The school board from my region originally wanted to expel me from every school in the region, but I was allowed to switch to a high school on the other side of town after finding out I wouldn't be able to transit to the closest out-of-region school and I didn't have any other means of transportation. I was at my school for the first semester of my junior year before switching to my third different high school. That one semester at my second school was when this incident occurred. I didn't know a single person except for one at the new school, and I've always had issues making new friends. I pretty much kept to myself most of the time. I spent maybe a couple of hours a day there mostly, and there were days or weeks where I just wouldn't go at all. There was a girl in one of my classes I consistently went to because I enjoyed it. I will call this girl Sally. Sally wasn't an unattractive person, she just gave me a really off-putting vibe. She talked to me on one of the first days I was there, and being grateful that I didn't have to initiate any conversation, started talking to her as well. We exchanged numbers and found each other on Facebook. Things were normal for a few days. We would talk about the homework, and we made a little small talk. It wasn't long until things took a weird turn. Sally suddenly started talking about how we were going to get married and have children and a farm with tons of horses. I would wake up to text along the lines of, "Good morning, my love, I can't wait to see you and smell you today," and equally creepy texts like that. I had never shown any interest in her romantically. I even said at one point that I didn't want to be in a relationship right now due to so many factors in my life being bad at the time. I wasn't good with confrontation, so I just started to drift away a little bit. I would wait longer to message her back, tried to sit away from her in class, that sort of stuff. Things got worse from there. She told me at one point that she had my face printed on a pillowcase and she made out with it every night, which I instantly didn't believe, but a mutual friend who had been to Sally's house told me that it was true. She would also follow me around the school in a ridiculously creepy fashion. She would always be waiting around corners or trailing me from 15 to 20 feet away. There was one point where I tried to ditch her by turning one corner, taking a shortcut through a couple of classes leading to another hallway, and then into one of the boys' bathrooms. I sat in one of the stalls thinking I would wait until the next period started to leave again. I felt like it was a foolproof plan until I heard someone come into the bathroom and Sally's voice calling my name. I pushed right past her and booked it out of the school and just sat in the forest and smoked a ton of weed to calm down. After that, she didn't message me at all, other than maybe once a week in the class we had together. She would text me 10 feet away saying, "I can smell the cigarettes on your breath," as well as very descriptive, inappropriate texts that I won't repeat here. I ignored these and tried to just forget about them. Things seemed to have blown over for a while until the beginning of December. Of course, being in high school still, my parents were not okay with me smoking cigarettes, so when I went to bed for the night, I would open my window and climb onto the little overhang of the roof to have a smoke. One night, I was opening my window when I got a text. It was like 2 a.m. in the morning, so of course I was intrigued. I was still opening my window as I read the text, and it was Sally saying something along the lines of, "Your house looks so beautiful when it's covered in snow." I chalked it up to nonsense because I lived on the other side of town from my school and her, and she had never been over this way with me before, so she had no way of knowing which house was mine. As I was climbing out onto the ledge, I saw a figure standing on the other side of the street. I couldn't tell who it was because it was snowing badly, and this person was standing in front of the streetlight, which made their front nearly impossible to make out. I was a little scared at this point after the text and seeing this person standing there, but they didn't move at all. I finished the smoke quickly, and as I was climbing back in, I heard Sally's voice faintly say, "You're the only person I'll ever love for the rest of my life." Shortly after that is when I switched to my third school for unrelated reasons, and I never heard from her again. I live alone in a house that I'm currently renting. I don't know any of the neighbors at all. It's a populated neighborhood where the yards are small and there are many houses in rows. Not too long after I moved in, one time I ordered something online to be delivered. However, I never received it, even after it said it had been delivered. Nothing was there and I had no photos of the delivery from the company, so I assumed that it must have been sent to my old address or something by accident. If that was the case, I would not have been able to get it as that was too far away. so I decided to just order it again. A few days later, when it was delivered, I didn't know it had been delivered yet, but it was there. I was upstairs on the second floor of my place when I noticed something through a front window. I saw a woman exit the house directly across the street from mine. She then walked through her front yard and basically made a beeline to my front yard. She then proceeded to walk right through the yard and up to my front step. I was just standing there watching her, and I don't think she knew I was there because she never once looked at me. I thought that she was going to knock on the door, but for what reason I did not know. She went out of my sight when she got up to the front step because I couldn't see that from my angle. But instead of knocking on the door, I saw her then come back into my view seconds later, walking away and holding a package. I realized that was my delivery and she was walking away really fast. My neighbor had just stole my package. I took off running out of the room and down the stairs. When I got to the front door though, the woman was already across the street and entering her house. By the time I opened the door, she had just got inside. I marched right over there and then banged on her front door. Moments later, she answered it, looking all confused. She was opening the door just a crack, like she was all defensive, and just stuck her head around the corner. It was like she was ready to slam the door shut at a moment's notice. I told her that I just saw her take my package and steal it. The woman then claimed that it was her package and it had been delivered to my house by mistake. Not knowing 100% if my package had in fact been delivered yet, I stopped and thought for a moment. She got me to actually doubt myself there for a second. But then I told her that I had just ordered a package and it was supposed to be delivered that day and should be there by now. The woman told me once more that no, it was hers and that she knew nothing about my packages. Then she said that she had to go and slammed the door shut and locked it really loud. I then went on my phone and checked my email. Sure enough, it said that my package had just been delivered about 30 minutes earlier, and there was no package there now. I knew she had stole it. So I then banged on the door and told her that I knew she stole my package. She didn't answer though. I tried to reason with her. I yelled from the front step that if she could show me the package with her name on it, I would leave her alone, but she still didn't answer. I stood there knocking on the door on and off for like 10 minutes, but she refused to come to the door again. I was so mad. I didn't want to do anything crazy, so I cooled down and then calmly walked back to my place. That explained why I didn't get my delivery the first time, because she had stolen that one too. I realized that I needed to figure out how to stop this woman. I thought about calling the cops, but then decided to give her one last opportunity to come clean, because after all, calling the cops on a neighbor can start a whole mess, and she probably wouldn't get in that much trouble for stealing one $30 package from me twice. So I went back to her house the following day. As to be expected, she did not answer, so I left a note. It said, "I know you stole my packages. You have 48 hours to come clean before I get the cops involved. Sincerely, your neighbor." Well, later that day, I got a knock at my door. I thought that it would be the woman, but when I opened it, it wasn't her. It was some man. I'd never seen him before, but he said that he was the husband of the woman across the street. He said that she was terribly upset because I had accused her of stealing, and he knew that she was innocent. He tried to lecture me about making a false police report and accusing others of stealing. I tried to tell him my evidence, which was clear as day, but he would have none of it. He stormed off, claiming that if I got the cops involved, he would, quote, "make my life miserable," whatever that means. Now, I should have just gone to the cops right then and there, but that encounter made me want to try to catch the woman in the act. So I went out and bought a security camera and positioned it on my front step. Then I ordered a package and purposely left it out for several days. However, I got no luck. I realized that she probably saw the camera, possibly even saw me installing it, because the camera only showed the front step and then part of the front yard and driveway. It didn't reach the street or the neighbor's property, so she very well could have been on her way over to steal again and then noticed it. I tried to hide it, but there were really no great hiding places to make it impossible to see. But at least this would stop her from stealing in the future. For a few weeks, things were fine. I never saw her or her husband or anything. I decided to just let the matter go, as angry as I still was about it. Then, one night, I arrived home pretty late. When I did, for whatever reason, I glanced over across the street. There was one light on in a front window. I saw the woman just staring at me from inside with this angry look on her face. She was just glaring right at me. When we made eye contact, she didn't look away or anything. I turned away and then walked inside. But when I got to a front window in the house and looked out, I saw that she was still staring at my house. She was just glaring at it with an angry face. It was really creepy. She remained like that for about 10 minutes. Then she finally moved away and covered her window. I guess that she was pouting because she couldn't steal any more of my packages. That was the last time I saw her. I haven't seen her or her husband since then. and that was almost a year ago now. I'm not aware of them moving out, as the same car is still in their driveway, but I haven't seen them in any capacity. That's probably a good thing, and I probably won't live here too much longer as I'm looking at places across town. I hope that I never see that woman again. For a little background to this story, I was a young woman at the time living in my second apartment since graduating college. This place was a lot nicer than my first, which had been kind of a dump, so I was very excited to move into a much nicer building. This one was only a few years old and costed a lot more than my old place. I had gotten a pretty good job the previous year though, so I was finally able to afford it. It was an apartment complex of several buildings all next to each other. My place was on the 3rd floor of the second building. I got moved in and then settled in pretty quickly. I was really enjoying living in a decent apartment building. Then, about just a week or two into living there, I came home from work one day to find an envelope on my door. It was kind of shoved in the crack between the door and the frame. I figured that it was something from management, but I didn't know what. I took it and went inside. However, when I opened the envelope, there was a handwritten note inside. It said something like, "Welcome to the apartment. It's great to have you here. I hope you enjoy it. From your neighbor." When I read it, I thought that it was really nice, and I figured it was probably from one of my next door neighbors or maybe my neighbor across the hallway. It did not say who it was from though, which I found a little bit strange. Nevertheless, I was glad to live in a place with such welcoming people, although to that point I had not met anybody else there yet. A couple of days later, I was leaving for work, and I happened to see a neighbor leaving her apartment as well. It was an older woman, and I thought that maybe she had written the note. So I said hi to her and asked her, but she said that she did not. I asked her if she knew who did, but she didn't know. It was kind of a mystery, but overall not too big of a deal. A few days after this, I got another note though. I once again came home to find a note on my door, and when I read this one, it was an invitation to meet. The note said something like, "I'd love to have you over for some coffee to welcome you to the building." Then it gave their apartment number. Now, for some reason, I was under the impression that it was maybe an older woman or just a woman in general. The way that it was written and the handwriting style and all that gave me the impression. Plus, the paper that it was written on had flower designs on it. The letter also said that I could drop by any time. So based on the fact that this person kept sending me notes, it seemed like they wanted to meet me. I wasn't sure why they hadn't just knocked on my door themselves when I was home. But anyways, one evening I went to go say hi and introduce myself. However, it was really strange, because their apartment number was not by mine at all. In fact, it wasn't even on my floor. It was located on the 1st floor and on the complete opposite end of the building. It was almost as far as you could possibly be from my place. So how on earth did this person ever even see me or know who I was and where I lived? Still, I knocked on the door. Soon after, a man answered. I was surprised to see him, as like I said, I thought it would be a woman. He invited me inside, and I instantly got a bad vibe from him. He was sort of short and had an uneven beard. I asked him if he was the one who left the notes, and he said yes. I told him thanks, and that it was very nice, and I had wanted to meet the person who had wrote them. He said that I should sit down and make myself at home, and he would get me a drink. I said that I was on my way out, which I had made up on the spot. He seemed upset by that, and I caved and said that I would stay for just a couple of minutes. So I sat down in his place, which seemed pretty average. I was kind of curious as to why he left the note. I asked him how long he had lived there and how he had noticed me because my apartment was so far from his. The guy claimed that he had lived there for years, and he welcomed everyone new into the building, which made me feel a bit better. Then he asked me how I liked working at my job, and then mentioned the exact company that I worked for. I had no idea how he would know this information. There would be literally no way to know that at all. I played it off, and I just said that it was good, and then said that I had to be going. That really creeped me out how he knew that. The man seemed disappointed that I said I had to go, but I didn't care. I left, and then went back to my place. I got back to my apartment and hoped that I would not get any more notes and would never run into that guy again. He really gave me the creeps. About a week went by and nothing happened. I had mostly forgot about the whole thing. But then, one night, I was at home by myself and it was pretty late. Things were quiet and I heard someone walking down the hallway. I thought nothing of it, as this was obviously an everyday occurrence. However, the footsteps seemed to stop right outside my door. Sure, it could have been the neighbor across the hallway, which I figured it was. But I didn't hear a door open. It was like the footsteps just stopped. So I was curious, and I quietly tiptoed over to the door. Then I looked through the peephole. When I did, I saw that same man standing there outside my door. He was just looking at the door like he was debating whether to knock on it or try opening it or something. It was locked, but the man did not try to open it. Instead, I saw him lean in and put his ear to the door as if to try to listen. I kept still and literally held my breath. I didn't think he knew I was right on the other side, but I didn't know for sure. For the next minute or so, it was just him and I, not moving or making a sound. Then, finally, he backed up. I saw him walk away down the hallway a few seconds later. I finally could relax a little bit. I considered reporting him to management, and I should have, but I didn't. I was just hoping that I would not see him again. I never went by his apartment, and I never really had a reason to either. I was also more careful all the time, but I never noticed anything suspicious. Then, after not seeing him for about a month, I ran into another neighbor and decided to bring the situation up. She knew who I was talking about and hadn't got any notes from him herself, but she said that she had talked to him once and he seemed like a creep. She also said that he actually had just recently been evicted from the building for not paying his rent. That was a huge relief to me. After that, I never saw him or heard from him again. But it still creeps me out how he knew where I worked. Either he looked me up online and somehow found it out, or he must have followed me to work. Which one, I'm not sure, but I'm hoping that it was not the latter. Either way, I hope I never see that guy again. For the past 2.5 years, I've been living in the north of the Scottish Highlands. The town I'm in is as far north as you can go, right by the sea. When my dad and his wife told me they'd bought an old house up there, I didn't hesitate. I'd grown up in a dull part of England and always wanted space, hills, and quiet. In my spare time living there, I explored. East of town, past the mouth of the river, there's a ruin of an old castle, and beyond that, a narrow trail that follows the cliffs along the coast. The path dips down at the baseline of the cliffs in places, then climbs back up. On a clear day, it's one of the best walks I've ever done. 6 months after moving, just after Christmas, I'd come out of a long-distance relationship. It had dragged on longer than it should have. Now that it was over, I decided to clear my head with a long hike. I left bright and early at 6 a.m. since it was winter and it would get dark earlier. The weather was cold but dry and the sea was calm. I walked for hours, farther than I'd gone before. By mid-afternoon, I reached what I thought was an abandoned village. Stone houses stood near a loose row near a small bay. There was a round tower at one end, half collapsed. Later I found out that it was part of the Heritage Center, a preserved old port settlement. In winter, it was closed and empty though. I had walked about 10 miles from town so far. Across the bay, further east, I could see larger cliffs in the distance. I was tired, but I told myself that I would cross the bay, reach the cliffs, and then turn back. That was a mistake. The crossing took longer than I expected. The sand was uneven and heavy underfoot. By the time I was about halfway around the bay, the light was fading. The cliffs didn't seem any closer. I checked the time and realized something. I needed to turn back towards town because the tide would come in later. Some sections of the trail down low by the sea would be cut off and submerged if I waited too long. It was fully dark by the time I walked back through the settlement. At night, it didn't feel like a heritage site. I used my phone's light and shined it across the windows of the stone houses as I passed. I don't know why, but I half expected to see someone inside. As I was walking through the town, I heard an engine. A white van rolled into the open area near the houses and stopped. I froze behind one of the boats. 3 young men got out. I would guess they were in their early 20s, wearing hoodies and dark jackets. One of them dragged a metal bin into the open. Another carried something from the van. They started a fire in the bin. I couldn't see what they were burning in the trash can. I had no idea how long they would be there, and I needed to get back before the tide would come in, so I decided to just keep walking and hopefully they wouldn't see me in the darkness. I stepped out from behind the boat and walked without my light on. Unfortunately, they noticed me in the darkness, but didn't call out or say anything. They just stared at me as I walked past them. When I reached the edge of the settlement at the start of the trail, I looked back. 2 of them were still standing around the fire. One wasn't anymore. I told myself that he must be inside the van. I started along the trail at a steady pace. The wind had picked up, and the sea was louder now. After about 5 minutes, I heard footsteps which were not mine. I didn't look back at first because I didn't want to confirm it, but when the path widened slightly, I turned. The figure was about 30 meters behind me. He was on the path coming my way. The next section of the trail dipped down towards the base of the cliffs and into a patch of low trees and scrub. I made the decision and sprinted up ahead to that part of the trail with my light off. Once I got there, instead of staying on the main path, I slipped off it and crouched behind a cluster of rocks near the trees. Footsteps passed on the path above me, and then they stopped. I heard another set of footsteps joining the first. "Where'd he go?" one of them said. "He was right here." One of them slid down the slope, boots scraping on loose stones. I pressed myself flat against the ground, making myself as small as possible. A flashlight beam cut through the dark, sweeping across the rocks. It passed right near me, but I was well concealed. "He's not here," one of them said. "He must have gone ahead." Eventually, I heard them climb back up to the path. Their footsteps moved away, heading farther west towards town. They thought I had kept walking. I didn't move for a long time. My legs had gone numb. When I finally stood, I waited until I couldn't hear anything but the sea. Instead of going back to the main trail straight away, I cut through the low trees and followed the cliff edge at a distance from the path. It was slower, and I slipped more than once, but I didn't want to run into them again. It took me hours to get back, and I kept expecting to see the van parked near the entrance to the trail back in town. When I finally reached the road near town, there were no vans. I reported it the next day, and the police took my statement. No news ever came of it, but I'm certain they were doing something highly illegal if they felt the need to follow me and look for me. In my freshman year of high school, I was well known and had lots of friends. I was very friendly, and every time I saw someone alone, I would greet them and offer them my friendship. Sometime during the year in my math class, we had a new guy. He had recently moved to the U.S. from Mexico. He hardly knew any English, and me being Hispanic was able to speak to him in Spanish to make him feel welcome. He had no other friends and sat by himself. In our math class we had together, I started helping him a lot with homework and understanding what was going on. He sat behind me, and he would always play with ends of my hair. I sort of felt like he had a crush on me, and he was not bad looking, so I didn't look at it as a big deal. For a few months he played with my hair, and it became a normal thing. He said he really liked my hair. Towards the end of those months, he said he wanted to play a game and asked me to write down the things I loved most in life. He would do the same, and we would both share our papers. Of course I wrote down my family, God, friends, and a bunch of other things. When I gave him back the list, he wanted specific names and said he would do the same. I ended up writing my friends' and family's names. One day we were just hanging out in class, and he said, "I want to show you something, but you can't tell anyone or else you're going to have to pay for it." I was so confused, I thought maybe he was about to ask me out. He pulled out a Ziploc bag, and I couldn't really tell what was in the bag. It wasn't until he placed it on the table that I noticed it was a Ziploc bag full of hair. He told me that it was my hair. He then pulled up his sleeve and showed me his arm. He had about 10 healed scars that went down his arm. There was one fresh wound, and he grabbed my hair from the bag and placed it on top of his freshly opened wound from the night before. Then he said to me, "You are mine now." He said, "I know who you love and what you love. If you don't do as I say, you will pay for everything." He told me that each of his scars represented a soul that he owns. My heart sank. He started to smirk, and I ran out of the class crying and ran to the office. Everyone was so confused. I asked to speak to my counselor immediately. I explained what had happened, and he was pulled out of class, taken to the principal's office, and was expelled that same day. I feared for my life. They found all these notes of other people in his backpack, including mine I had written listing the names of who I loved. They saw the scars and found my hair. I never heard of him or from him again. I had some bad stuff happening in my life after that, and I always thought of that kid from high school and if he was somehow connected. Until this day, I don't know if he was just messing with me or if he was serious. But I will tell you, after that encounter, I was no longer the super friendly and open-hearted person that I was before. I'm a 15-year-old girl from Nebraska. I live in Omaha, but I've always loved the outdoors. I go hunting or hiking almost every weekend with my dad or friends. I have two friends who I will call Haley and Todd. I've known them for years, and we would never hike alone because of the risks, so we became a group. Anyways, it was spring break when we went on a week-long backpacking trip. It was a 7-hour drive there, and Haley had her license, so she drove. The first few hours of the drive were fun, but when we got closer to the forest, something felt off. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I just had this terrible feeling. I ignored it and thought that I was just nervous. A few hours later and the feeling was still there as we were at the trailhead. We grabbed our packs and off we went. I felt like I was at home in the trees and the feeling was soon forgotten. We walked a little over 5 miles that day before we set up camp. We had a 2-person tent that Haley and I had brought, and then a hammock that Todd had brought. After we set up camp, we ate and were just chilling by the fire talking. Todd began complaining about how he didn't want to sleep in his hammock. I didn't want to listen to him complaining and offered to switch places. He gladly accepted. So the night went on like usual until around 2 a.m. when we all got tired and went to bed. Well, everyone but me. I have extremely bad insomnia, so I was just tending to the fire and chilling. Finally, I decided to get into the hammock and read. I put out the fire, grabbed my headlamp, and then got into the hammock. I noticed that something was off, but I couldn't place what it was. That's when it hit me. It was completely silent in the woods. No crickets, no animals, nothing. My skin started to crawl, so I turned off my headlamp and laid down and kept silent. I wanted to try to hear some type of animal to ease my worries. That's when I heard it. Something was dragging against the tent. I wasn't even 5 feet away from the tent. It freaked me out and I did something really stupid. I called out my friends' names. The noise stopped. I got no answer, but this feeling of dread was something that I hadn't felt before or since. And then something poked into the hammock. It wasn't like a soft poke, it was like a jab. I was horrified and frozen. I also suffer from anxiety and I felt the panic rising in me. I couldn't understand what was going on. That's when I made another mistake. I decided I wanted to see what had just jabbed me. All this had happened within seconds. I reached up and clicked on my light. What I saw was straight out of a nightmare. There was a creature about 4 feet away from me staring at me kind of hunched over. I was about 3 feet off the ground in the hammock, so this thing was probably 7 or 8 feet tall. It looked like a dog, but it also didn't. It had the face of a wolf, but human in a way. The eyes looked red, and the ears looked like clipped pit bull ears. Its mouth pulled back in a snarl. I was terrified. Its teeth were huge and sharp. The paws, if you could even call them that, had sharp, long claws that looked like they could tear me apart. I stared at this thing for a few quick seconds before I screamed. As soon as I did that, the creature let out something between a scream and a howl. My friends started yelling and scrambling to open their tent, and that's when the creature and I finally broke eye contact as I heard the commotion behind it. I looked back up, and this thing was climbing a tree. As it was climbing, I saw the back of it, and it had the tail of a dog, grayish-silver fur, a black mane down its back, and a hump. I took this opportunity to scramble out of my hammock. We took off without grabbing anything. I had no shoes even. We made it back to the car, but the whole time back I heard something moving in the trees, like it was keeping tabs on us. The next day we had park rangers go get our things as we were freaked out. When they got there, everything was gone. Not even trash remained. It was as if we had never been there. They blamed us for lying, but we had no idea what had happened. I had no idea what I saw or why it didn't just kill me. I haven't been back in the woods for a very long time, but still every time I close my eyes, I see that thing and hear its roar. This is something that happened many years ago when I was a kid. I think I was around 12 years old. I just remember that one day there was some type of problem at my middle school. I think the electricity in the building went out or something, and it had to be fixed. So we got out of school for the day, and I got to stay home. But we went back the following day. However, it was really nice to have a random day off like that. My older brother was in high school, so he still had to go, and my parents both had work. So on that day that I had off, I was left home alone that day. I had already woke up early as I was expecting to go to school, and after everybody left, I wasn't tired right away. So I went into the living room and I sat on the couch and just started watching TV. Probably about an hour into my unexpected day off, I heard something from outside. It sounded like footsteps of somebody right outside our house, like they were going to the front door. I looked over out the window from where I was on the couch. From there, I could see a man who was our next-door neighbor. He lived in the house just to the left of ours, and I had never talked to him or anything, but I had seen him a few times and I knew who he was. I saw him go up to our front step and figured that he was going to knock on the door. I didn't feel like answering it though, and I figured that I would be no help, so I didn't have plans to answer the door. He probably wanted my parents anyways. However, he did not knock on the door. I saw him walk up to the door and stand there, and then he tried to open it. I was sitting in a spot that he probably could not see me at, and he didn't look in my direction either. In fact, I could barely see him from where he was next to the door, but I heard him try to open it. This was pretty weird. Then I heard him walking away. At that point I was confused, so I got up and went over to the door. I looked out and I thought that I would see him walking back to his house. But no. Instead, he walked around our house like he was going to the backyard. Then I moved to a rear window, and I was careful not to let him see me. Our next-door neighbor then went into our backyard. He walked over to the back door to our house and then tried to open it. That one was also locked, though. I was really confused as to what he was doing. He then walked around a bit in our backyard and was looking at the house. After standing there momentarily, he walked over to a window. I thought that he might try to break it or something, and I was getting really freaked out by this. He walked up to the window and appeared to look in. I ducked down so as to not be seen, even though I was at a different window. I didn't hear anything then, but when I looked back, he wasn't at the window anymore. I saw him then casually walking back to his house, and then he went inside. For the rest of the time that I was home alone that day, he did not return, and I didn't see him outside or anything. Eventually, my brother got home from school, and my parents got home from work. I told them about it, and they thought it was really weird, but didn't seem to take it that serious. They chalked it up to maybe he was just wondering if anybody was home and wanted to borrow something. They didn't believe that he actually tried to open the door. Although my parents were not that close with our neighbor, they talked to him several times and felt that he wouldn't do something like that. After that event, I'm not aware of anything else like it happening. The man moved out like a few years later. I don't think he ever did anything like that again, but I know what I saw and I know what I heard, and I still don't know why he did that. I'm assuming that he just didn't know that I was home and thought that the house was empty. I just don't know why he would try to break in like that. So this story happened around the first COVID lockdown. At the time, I was 17. I'm a guy who likes to hike and explore nature. I live in Australia, so I'm very careful when exploring, as you never know which pile of leaves might hide a snake. During lockdown, I couldn't stand being inside all day, so I took a weekend trip to the Blue Mountains, intending to just spend some time in nature. So I decided to go out and just spend the afternoon in nature. I packed some water, snacks, and a first aid kit. I was following a path I had taken a couple of times before, when I heard what sounded like sticks snapping a little off the path up ahead. Figuring that it was just another hiker who had dropped something or saw something interesting just off the path, I kept walking. As I kept going, I got to where I thought the sound had come from, but saw no one. A little creeped out, I continued, but upon checking my watch, I decided to turn back as it would be getting dark soon. Just as I passed that same spot where I had heard the sounds, I noticed something. I hadn't been paying too much attention to it, but all the bird sounds that had kept going my entire hike suddenly stopped. I looked around confused when I heard slow, quiet cracking. Terrified, I took off running. When I finally got back to my car, I quickly got in and locked it. My heart pounding, I started out the way I had come, fully expecting some kind of monster to come charging out after me. But then there was nothing, and the birds started singing again, nearly giving me a heart attack. I quickly started the car and drove off. The next day, I guess feeling the need to be a horror movie character and seek some closure about what had made the sound, I decided to investigate the area again. I parked my car and started to walk to the trail again, this time much earlier in the day. I went back to the same place as the day before and looked around. Upon finding nothing, I decided to keep walking on the trail, looking for any sign of animals that could have made that sound. Besides a few snakes, I found nothing. After nearly an hour of going back and forth, I suddenly got goosebumps. I was at a bend in the trail, but looking at it, I felt a sudden urge to stop. When I did, I felt as though I was being watched. Staring at the bend, it got quiet again, just like the day before. In silence, I felt like I was choking. Then I heard a sound. It was like bones cracking or something gurgling. I was terrified, but felt paralyzed. Only when I heard movement again did I finally snap out of it. Once again, I was running away on the path, but this time I could hear something in the underbrush moving behind me. Deciding to look behind me, all I could see was foliage moving. I finally managed to get to my car, got in, and started the engine before taking off so fast I nearly crashed. I haven't been back to that trail since then. In the 9th grade, I would have been about 13 or 14 years old, and I had no friends. I was kind of weird and it threw people off. Making friends in high school was so difficult for me because I refused to change who I was just to fit in. During the second week of school, I met a guy in my English class. Our teacher had sat us together and we had begun talking and building a friendship. He was very nice and we had a lot in common. He came from a different elementary school. It was odd because the people from his elementary school commonly went to a different high school, although he insisted that he wanted to go to this high school because there were certain classes that he wanted to take that the other school didn't offer. After about a week of talking together during English, he asked if I wanted to eat lunch with him. We had the same lunch period, and he said he noticed how often I sat alone to eat. I thought it was a nice gesture, so I agreed. We ended up having lunch together for a while, but then I started to make some new friends. I always invited him to eat lunch with us, but he always declined. Then one day in English class, he passed me a note. This was very strange since we were sitting right next to each other. The note said, "I need to talk to you. Can we please sit alone together for lunch?" I wrote back saying that I would sit with him, and we hardly spoke for the rest of the period. I got a really strange vibe from him. It was now lunchtime, and I saw him sitting at the end of a row. I went to sit down, and he said, "No, let's go outside to talk," so I agreed. He looked genuinely upset, and I wanted to know what was going on. When we got outside, he led me over to sit on a curb in front of the school and started talking very aggressively. He told me that it was unfair of me to make other new friends when he was the one who befriended me first. He told me that I had to eat lunch with him because when I was alone, he ate lunch with me, so now that he's alone, I was obligated to eat with him. It was a very bizarre conversation. I explained that he could sit with me and my friends, and that way there wouldn't be any issues and he would even make some new friends. I told him I had enough friendship to spread around and that he had nothing to be upset about. But what he said next completely shocked me. I could see the anger in his eyes. He grabbed my arm and said, "I don't think you understand. You owe me this." I got completely freaked out at that point and told him that we could sit together every other day. I just wanted to get away from him and go back inside where more people were around. After that day, I started getting weird messages in my email. I'll never forget the first email I received. He said some very mean and aggressive things. I didn't recognize the email address at first and assumed it was some internet troll trying to scare me. Then they started coming more frequently, all with similar messages. He was talking about how I was terrible and all women were terrible. I started getting scared, so I showed my friends these emails. They agreed that it was weird, but also agreed there was probably some random person trying to scare people. But one friend told me that she thought it was the kid who I ate lunch with, because she had heard stories about why he came to our school instead of going to another high school. She told me that he was so obsessed with one of the girls in his class that her mom got a restraining order against him over the summer. I told her that it sounded insane and I didn't believe it. I was still having lunch with him on alternate days, and we were still friendly during English class, but I really wanted to distance myself from him. After Christmas break, our schedules changed for the semester. I was honestly very happy about this because I knew I'd have a different lunch period than him and we wouldn't have English together anymore. I could slowly disassociate myself from him, but I was wrong. He started leaving notes in my locker, confessing his undying love and explaining that we were meant to take over the world together. At the time, I thought it was very nice of him to say, but the feelings were not mutual. Eventually, I had to tell him that enough was enough. I explained to him that he was overwhelming me and that I needed a little space from our friendship. He seemed to understand, and he didn't get upset or yell. He just agreed to give me my space, which lasted about 2 days before the emails started getting worse. They started threatening my life, telling me that they knew where I lived and went to school. I went straight to my mom when this started happening. I know I should have done that sooner about the emails, but I finally did. My mom called the police, and the police informed the school. The school looked up the email in their records and found out that it was him, of course, who had been sending the nasty emails all along. He was suspended and wouldn't even look at me anymore after that for the rest of high school, which was fine by me. 1 year after we graduated high school, he and his mother went for a drive. While she was driving, he hit her over 100 times. He had a psychotic break, and when the police found him, he tried saying that it was a car accident, but they questioned him about all the stab wounds and he admitted to killing her. That kid was really scary. I live with my wife in a very quiet neighborhood. We're a little bit out in the country and have lived here for years. I know a good number of my neighbors, but not all of them, obviously. The houses are a little bit more spread out, and the yards are rather large, with some woods around. Most of the yards are several acres or more. A few years ago, I was at home with my wife one night, and it was rather late. In fact, I was about to go to bed in a couple of minutes when I heard a knock at the front door. This was highly unusual. Being out here in the country, seldom do we ever get door-to-door salesmen or anything like that, but especially not at 11 o'clock at night. I headed over to see who on earth could possibly be there at this hour. My wife told me not to even answer the door, but I was curious. I opened it, and I saw a young man standing there. I had never seen him before in my life. He looked to be maybe in his mid-20s and wore a sweatshirt and jeans. He said hi, and then said that he was my neighbor from down the street. He proceeded to tell me that he had accidentally locked himself out of his house. Then he asked me if I wouldn't mind letting him stay at my house for the night. I told him that I would mind, and I asked him why he didn't just call a locksmith or the police, or just break back in there. The man claimed that he had called a locksmith, but they wouldn't be out until morning, and he didn't want to break anything. I asked him how he even locked himself out. I'm not even sure how that's possible, because I locked my door from the outside with my key. The guy said that he didn't even know, but his keys were inside and his doors were all locked. He wasn't really making much sense, and this situation was seeming really suspicious. I also noticed as I was standing there talking to the young man that there was a car parked on the side of the street a ways down that was running. I asked him if that was his car and pointed at it, and he said no, he didn't know who that was. It was pretty unusual for a car to park on the side of the street because of the driveways being long and it also being a quiet area. This was also highly unusual. I told the guy that he couldn't stay at our place, so he would have to get to Steppen. He practically begged me and claimed that he had asked all the other neighbors and I was his last hope. That also made no sense because we were not like the last house on the street or anything. We were kind of in the middle, so why would he randomly go to our house last? I wasn't buying a cent of this guy's crap. I told him to get a hotel, and he said that he didn't have any money as his wallet was in his house. This guy had an excuse for everything. I finally told him to get lost or I would call the cops, and he finally gave up and said okay. I shut the door and the guy then walked off down the driveway. I stayed at the window and watched the guy though to see where he would go. He walked out into the street and then walked right up to the car that was parked on the side of the road. He then proceeded to get in the back seat of it and then the car drove away. I was not surprised. That guy was definitely up to no good. I called the police non-emergency line and reported it. I'm hoping that he didn't get anybody else to fall for his trick. I never heard anything more regarding it, but I'm really glad that I didn't let him into my house. I'm not sure what would have happened if I had let him stay the night like he wanted. Things like that happening in our area are very unusual. I probably shouldn't have even answered the door. I probably should have just listened to my wife. But needless to say, that guy did not even live in our neighborhood. When I was 16, I went on a hike with a girl I had just started dating. There's a large county preserve about 40 minutes from where I grew up in the mountains. I'd been there a handful of times with friends and family, mostly sticking to the main trails. One afternoon, I told her I knew a lookout point that had a clear view over the valley and that we should go see it. We got dropped off near the ranger station. There was a big board with trail maps, safety notices, and a list of closed areas. We stood there for a minute pretending to study it, but I was confident I remembered the way. I led us down what I thought was the right trail that I had always took with my family. The path was wide, and we passed a few other hikers. After about a half an hour, the trail narrowed and split. I picked the left fork without giving it too much thought. The trees got thicker, and we stopped seeing other people. Eventually, we came to a clearing with an old fenced-off structure. It was some kind of utility site. There were 2 tall metal towers with blinking lights, and a small concrete building with peeling paint. Off to the side was what looked like an old fire lookout tower that had collapsed on itself years ago. By then I knew we weren't headed towards the overlook I had in mind. We were still higher than I remembered, and the terrain didn't match. Still, I didn't want to turn back and admit it. There was a dirt service road with fresh tire tracks cutting downhill, so we followed that instead. The road led to a gravel path that curved along the side of the mountain. It kept dropping lower than I expected. After maybe 15 minutes, the trees thinned out and we saw some rooftops below us. At first, I thought that it was a campground or some kind of retreat center, but as we got closer, it didn't look well maintained at all. It was a small town, or at least it used to be. There were rows of houses with broken windows, a grocery store with its sign still hanging, and a gas station with rusted pumps. We saw a garage with old cars inside, and farther down what looked like a skating rink or maybe a small warehouse with faded murals on the outside. We walked down one of the streets. Weeds were growing through the pavement, and a few cars were parked along the curb, covered in dirt and leaves. Some looked like they were from the 1970s or 80s, but there were also a few that didn't seem that old. It didn't make sense as to why the cars would still be there if everybody left the town. It was now late in the afternoon. The sun was starting to dip behind the ridge. She asked me if I knew about this place. I told her I didn't, but I tried to act like it wasn't a big deal. I took a few photos with my phone, mostly wide shots of the empty streets. There wasn't anything dramatic about them, just quiet buildings and cars that hadn't moved in years. We realized that we should probably find a way back before it got dark. Our phones barely had any signals. We tried following what looked like the main road out of town, but it curved towards a drop-off. We ended up on a ridge overlooking a deep ravine. At the bottom, there was a wide clearing with a circle of blackened ground, like people had been lighting fires there recently. Across the ravine, we could see what might have been the entrance road, but there was no easy way to reach it from where we stood. I suggested we try to climb down and cross, but my girlfriend shut that idea down immediately. We kept moving across the ridge until we reached a small brick building covered in graffiti. The door was gone. Inside, it was empty, except for a metal desk and broken glass. We sat on the floor for a few minutes resting in the quiet. I remember hearing the wind through the open doorway. That's when we heard voices. They were coming from somewhere below us. We stepped outside and tried to locate where it was coming from. Down near the clearing of the ravine, we saw a group of men, maybe 5 or 6 of them. They didn't have shirts on, and they were standing in a loose circle. I could tell they were speaking English, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. It echoed strangely off the canyon walls. We didn't wait around to think about approaching the men. We moved in the opposite direction as quietly as we could, then picked up our pace as we were out of sight off the ridge. Neither of us said much. I could tell she was scared, and I was too, but I didn't want to show it. After a while, we found a narrow trail that followed a stream. We stuck to it, knowing that the water would lead somewhere. It took us a long time, at least 2 hours, but eventually the trail opened behind a private golf course. We walked onto the edge of the property, and finally got a good enough signal to call our ride. We waited near the parking lot until her brother picked us up. We didn't talk much on the drive home. Later, I tried to look up information about that town. I searched for old maps and local history forums, but couldn't find anything that matched what we saw. I asked a few people that lived in the area their whole lives. None of them knew what I was talking about. Once when I mentioned it to a friend, I asked my girlfriend to confirm that it actually happened the way I described it. She did, but afterwards she accused me of leading us there on purpose, either trying to intentionally scare her or get lucky with her in that abandoned shed we rested in. We weren't together for much longer after that, and so now I'm the only person I know who has ever seen or heard of that place. I've explored other abandoned places since then, but nothing has felt quite the same. Getting lost in that place with the sun going down and no clear way out is still the most uneasy I've ever felt. It's not somewhere I'd want to end up again, especially in the dark. When I was in high school, I had a science teacher who I will call Mr. F. He taught environmental science and was very tall with graying hair. He always wore the standard working school clothes, which were a collared shirt with high-waisted slacks. He had a strange sense of humor that fitted well with kids, which at first made us all think that he was quite funny. He had this strange charm about him that just made you feel comfortable, but deeply to me it also felt a bit forced. As the year went on taking his class, me and my fellow classmates started to feel a disliking towards him, since his behavior started changing and becoming more aggressive and stricter. My school was small, and my whole class size was small, so once one of us started disliking a teacher, the word would get around quickly. It wasn't until the end of the year where things in his class would get weird. He would start ranting about a bunch of random things not relevant to the class at all, and continued to get more aggressive each week. Other teachers became aware of this, but because of his popularity with most of the faculty due to his charm, our complaints were only met with the assumption of us being bratty kids. One day during our time in study hall, Mr. F came into our classroom as our usual teacher who would supervise us had gone to use the restroom. While he was there, the kid next to me needed help with the science homework that Mr. F had assigned a class period before. I was wearing a pair of overalls that were way too big for me, and they kept slipping, which made me have to constantly pull them up all day. While doing my math homework in a focused spell, I decided to let my straps fall loose and fall down my arms, exposing a bit of my sides of my waist. Mr. F paused and looked up at me and told me that the straps in my overalls had fallen, but when I turned to look at him, he was staring at me with this gross, wide smirk on his face. It made me feel widely uncomfortable and a bit frightened. I remember saying, "Oh, thanks," before pulling them back up and wanting to vanish right then and there. It became a problem as more and more of the girls in my class had started to make complaints about him, of him being a little too touchy at times. There were also weird comments, such as another classmate being creeped out after he had met their mother and said to her, "Oh, so that's where you get your good looks from." On the day of our final exams, Mr. F was nowhere to be seen, along with his son Jason, who was also in our class. We didn't know anything about him or his son's whereabouts until the day right before our school's graduation. That's when the principal sent a frantic email detailing that Mr. F was arrested on accounts of inappropriate activity. After the accusations, people at my school didn't really have much time to process due to graduation coming around, and also everyone going away for summer break. Most of the kids in my class felt bad for Jason since he was completely unaware of his dad's actions. Jason still remained at the school for another 2 years and actually became a good friend of mine. His relationship with his father has always been complicated, but I was never able to talk more on his father's case since I felt it was an uncomfortable topic for him. Years later, after I moved quite far and had moved schools, I came back to visit my grandparents and had a sleepover with Jason at my grandparents' home. When we dropped him off at his home afterwards, Mr. F was there with an ankle monitor bracelet doing yard work. He looked different and worn out, but still smiled with the same fake charm. Since I was out of the car to help Jason with his bags, Mr. F asked to give me a hug. Even though I really did not want to, I did to make the encounter less awkward. That was the last time I saw him. I found out that he pled guilty to all charges and the state had taken away his teaching license, along with him now being a registered offender. Jason has lived with his mom since, and she and Mr. F have gone through a divorce. I'm now about to go into college, but the way he impacted my life will always have an effect on me. Mr. F was not a good person, and my instinct always told me that. It's people like him in the world that terrify me. I live alone in an apartment. I've lived here for approximately 2 years now. The scariest thing that ever happened in my time living here took place 6 months in. To describe my apartment, it's an average good place, I would say. The building is about 10 years old maybe. It has pretty new technology, and it's overall pretty clean and well maintained. I live on the second floor of a 5-floor building, and I have lots of neighbors. However, I never have met any of them. Occasionally, I will see or hear people walking down the hallway. Sometimes I see the same people here and there, but I have never got to know any of them or anything like that. It's not a big deal though, as I have friends, just not any who live in the building, I guess. Anyways, one evening, I got home from work like any other. I got up to my floor and then walked down the hallway to my room. However, when I got there, I took out my key fob and held it up to the door to unlock it. But when I did, I heard the door make the locking sound instead of the unlocking sound. This meant that the door had actually been unlocked and I had now just locked it, which gave me a bad feeling, as I realized I must have forgotten to lock the door that morning when I left for work. I didn't know how that was possible, but I guess it was. Locking the door when I leave is just something that I do without thinking, so I couldn't say for certain if I had in fact locked it that morning. I walked into my place now feeling paranoid. However, nothing seemed out of place. The lights were also all off how I left them, so I felt better. I figured that I just forgot to lock the door and that was it. I went on with my routine. I went in my bedroom and then changed out of my work clothes. Right when I was about done changing though, I suddenly heard the front door to my apartment open and then moments later it closed. I knew that someone had been in my place. I ran to my bedroom door and looked out, but I saw no one. They must have left. I went to my front door, which was now unlocked again. I looked through my peephole but saw no one. Then I opened my door and looked out to the hallway. When I did, just barely for a second, I saw somebody entering the apartment directly next to mine. It was a ways down the hallway, and it was so fast that I could barely see them. It appeared to be a man, and he quickly went inside. The total time that I saw him was maybe half a second. I didn't recognize him, but very quickly his door shut and he was gone. There was no one else around. So it pretty much had to be him who had been in my place. The hallway was long and straight, so there would be no other places for anybody to hide. I thought about going over there and knocking on his door, but I was too creeped out to do it. I really didn't know what to do. I went around my apartment and looked in every room. Nothing was stolen or out of place to my knowledge at all. I came to the realization that the man must have been inside my apartment, probably hiding in the coat closet, and I had walked right past him. Another crazy thing is that when I was leaving that morning, I literally almost took my jacket from that coat closet. However, I told myself that the weather was warm enough to leave my jacket and I would be fine without it. I ended up regretting it when I was out that day, as it was colder than I thought. But if I had in fact took my jacket, the first thing I would have done after arriving home would have been to put it in that coat closet, and then I would have come face to face with that guy. And that's the only hiding place that really makes sense as to where he was. But why was he in there? I have no idea. I still can't believe that it happened. I sent an email to management about it, and they said they would look into the matter. However, I personally never heard anything back. But maybe a month or two after the incident, I was leaving my place one day and I noticed some new people moving furniture into that same apartment next door. So I guess the guy was now gone. I don't even know who he was. I had no clue what he looked like. I just simply said I saw a man go into that apartment. So maybe he got evicted, maybe it was just a coincidence. But I still live here, and I'm always very careful to make sure that I lock the door. This happened about 3 years ago. My sister invited the whole family to a wedding in the countryside in southern France. It was held at a vineyard with a stone house and a converted storage shed where they had dinner and dancing. By late evening, I'd had a few glasses of wine. I wasn't wasted, but I was buzzed for sure. Around 9:30 or 10 p.m., my girlfriend at the time said she wanted some air. The music was loud and the room was warm, so I agreed. We slipped out without telling anyone and walked down the gravel driveway that led from the vineyard to a narrow country road. It was very dark out there with no street lamps. The road we were on had rows of vines on each side and patches of trees on the other. The only light behind us was from the venue, and that faded quickly once we turned onto the road. Up ahead, past the bend in the road, there was a single white light about the height of the treetops. It wasn't moving. My girlfriend asked what it was. I said that it was probably a farmhouse or maybe a tractor parked in a field. I joked about it being a UFO as well. We kept walking, and out of the corner of my eye, I happened to notice movement in the woods to our right. I glanced over and saw two figures moving between the trunks. Both were wearing dark jackets with hoods up. They weren't right on the road, more like a few meters in, but they kept pace with us. I didn't tell my girlfriend straight away to not worry her, but I kept tabs on them without alerting them that I knew they were there, just glancing out of my peripheral vision. The situation sobered me up really quickly, and I decided that we should turn back towards the party. I told her we should head back because the cake cutting was probably about to start. I made sure to mention they would notice we were gone because we were supposed to cut the cake and everyone would be waiting. Neither of us actually had any responsibility at the wedding, but I felt like it was something important to say out loud that we did. When we turned around, the two people in the trees also turned. They stayed parallel to us as we walked back towards the vineyard. There were no cars parked along the road, and the nearest houses were far apart. I don't know where they came from or why they were out there. There was no logical explanation as to why they would be following us either. At one point, my girlfriend squeezed my hand and whispered that there were people in the trees. I said I knew, and I told her to just keep walking normally. At the same time, I made sure to mention again that they were waiting for us to cut the cake and we had to hurry up. Once we were close enough to hear the music clearly, the shapes in the trees stopped and nothing strange happened the rest of the night. Nothing actually happened and they never approached us, but I still think about how isolated that road was and how easily things could have gone differently. I'm sure if we had kept walking there might have been something bad waiting ahead of us or something along those lines. Back when I was in high school, I had a friend whose aunt died in a rather bad way, and it messed with her badly. No one seemed to understand, and one day when we were together before the first bell rang, she said she couldn't take it and was going to ditch school that day. I was fearful of what she might do on her own since she wasn't in a very good mindset, so I told her I would join her. That was the first time I had ever ditched school before, and from then on it became a bad habit of mine. Soon enough there were truancy charges against me. The judge sent me to do community service and attend counseling with my mother. The funny thing is that I was being punished for skipping school, yet the counseling normally took up time that I should be in school. My mom and I got through each session acting fake together. Afterwards we would go out eating or having fun, before dropping me off at school since they didn't check on what time the program ended each day. One day after my mom dropped me off, it was during the third period of school with about 20 minutes left in it before the bell would sound to start fourth. The halls were empty and silent, no one was in sight. My PE class was going on, and I knew the gym teacher would make me dress out, even if there was just 5 minutes left of class, so I decided to go sit the rest of the period away in the bathroom closet to the cafeteria. This bathroom, for whatever reason, was unfinished, specifically the ceiling, which kind of looked like hay. I went to the very last stall, closed the door, and sat. I didn't have a phone at that time, so I just leaned back and relaxed. After a long while, someone entered the bathroom, and without a stop, they went immediately in front of my stall, as if they already knew someone was in there. I had seen no one when I entered the bathroom, and it had been plenty long enough that it was unlikely someone had stood around waiting for me. Regardless, I started to panic, thinking that I was about to get in trouble for skipping, and as I looked at the pair of shoes that stood directly in front of my stall, I remember they were black with white lace, and it made me think of enlarged doll shoes. But then they turned, and before they would even have time to take a second step, the lights went out. I hate the dark, and I started trying to open my stall door, but for some reason it wouldn't budge, so I had to crawl underneath. I rushed past every open stall and felt frantically for the light switch, which I could not find, so I opened the door before switching it on. I looked back, and there was no one. If whoever had been in there had left, I would have seen light from the hallway when the door opened. They just vanished. I walked out and down the hallway a bit just before the bell rang, ending third period. I had never heard anything scary about our school that could have been related to that, and I still have no idea what that was, but I avoided that bathroom afterwards.